Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Pretty good, Dan. How you doing today?
Doing great, man. First of all, I have to get this out of the way. Is that a Ohio State shirt that I see?
It is. I can, like I, s- I can finally wear it with pride.
Yeah.
Now that might have lost to Michigan, but we got the natty.
I spent a little bit of time in Columbus, and the first time I arrived, I said, "Wow, look at the beautiful Ohio State campus." And the person I was with said, "You've got it all wrong. It's the Ohio State." It's like religious.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'm
Sean,
good,
you've
but I'm
got
I'm not that religious. I didn't
you're
go
not
to
that
Ohio
religious.
State. I went to Bowling Green State, but I've always been an Ohio State fan.
You've had a phenomenal career across starting the military, right? And then at some pretty big manufacturing companies. And so we'd love to just start out. Tell us a little bit about your career progression over the years.
Uh, so grew up in a small town in Ohio, and believe it or not, I was not the best student on the planet. So at the end of high school, I realized there was something a little bit different out there for me. So ended up enlisting in the Marines, and they gave me a job working on the electronics on jet aircraft. So I think that is really the start of everything that I did was going into the Marines and actually learning how to learn things and why you need to learn things. Um, and while I was doing that, I picked up logic. So a step of progressions to go through to make things make sense. Basically, trying to make sense of the chaos around me. So the Marines helped me to focus and help me figure out how to figure things out. Troubleshooting is one of the things that I did on a daily basis. So was injured, nothing battle related, anything like that, but was discharged from the Marines with a medical retirement. Started going to school, uh, and an opportunity came up to work for Honeywell for the summer on a production line. So I entered, at that time it was Allied Signal, later became Honeywell, working on a manufacturing line, sorting out spark plugs, and sitting there doing an inspection, looking at about 6 spark plugs every 4 seconds for 8 hours a day. Pretty mind-numbing work, but I worked my way up and eventually got to a point where I was a supervisor within that plant, supervising a couple of different lines, and then I got my own department. And as I was going through all of this, Honeywell is really good about training their people, whether it's through leadership or through one-piece flow or continuous improvement, Kanban, Toyota production system, all kinds of things like that, Greenbelt system. So I got a lot of training. And as I was a department leader, the sourcing team was always working with me on inventory reductions or streamlining or setting up Kanbans or doing whatnot. So one day at the end of the year, the sourcing manager came down and said, "Hey, how would you like to come and work, take my job?" And I said, "Absolutely, I'll try that." And he brought me up there and got me up there on a Monday and goes, "Oh, by the way, um, I'm done in 2 days. So after this, it's yours."
Hello.
So I got 2 days exposure to what sourcing was like, and he was gone. There was, fortunately, there was a couple other people there that helped me learn a few things, and what I didn't learn from them, I learned, through books and learning and courses and so on. Uh, but that was really the start of my sourcing career. That particular facility was shutting down, so I transferred to another one down here in North Carolina. I was fortunate enough to get a position as a warehouse manager initially, managing uh, a fiber operation, the warehouse for a fiber operation. And one of the things I was brought on to do was to outsource that operation. So it took advantage of some of the stuff that I had been doing in sourcing, helped me to outsource the operation. And then from there, they put me into their buyer position. Worked through as a buyer. So I was buying both direct and indirect for a fiber manufacturing company. And after I'd been there for about 5 years, they got sold off to a group of private investors. And within a short time, they realized they had too many plants that were making too much fiber and needed to shut one down. So I made the jump over to mowing, which was just down the road. They brought me in a single plant here in Sanford, North Carolina, and asked me to take a look at their indirect, a very limited role. I think it was a procurement specialist or something like that, and said, "Hey, we want you to take a look at, chemicals and the racks that we use to find out where you can save money." So it started there, and it grew and it grew and it grew, and it became anything that didn't cleanly fit on someone else's plate landed on my desk. I was always in a position where I was walking out on the floor, talking to the people, understanding everything behind what was going on, understanding, the technology behind something, how something's used, why it's used, where it's stored, how many we have, so on and so forth. So over time, the role kept growing and growing, and somebody noticed and said, "Hey, why don't you help these other couple of facilities here in North Carolina and see if you can start to leverage some of the stuff you've done with them?" Did that for a couple of years, and then somebody from corporate said, "Hey, we've got all these plants in the US. Why don't you help them out?" And from there, it got a little bit bigger. They said, "Hey, we got some plants in Canada and Mexico. Help them out." And before too long, it ended up that I was helping all the North and South American plants, and then I was helping some of the global plants. But because they operate in different markets, it's a little bit different, the kind of help that I had to provide them. And ultimately, when Fortune Brands became less of a holding company and more of a management company, they started bringing everyone together. They finally brought a sourcing team together and pulled me into that role. And that's where I've been for about the last 2.5 years. So I went from managing everything indirect for Moen down to kind of a relatively small slice of pie, but almost twice as much monetarily as I was managing with the Global Plumbing Group, as it was called in those days.
Well, it's an amazing career, Sean. By the way, Sean, I just want to like quick. There's a little bit of echo coming across on the control panel. You should see something just under, like, there's a picture of you in a little sound bar, and then there's something that says echo cancellation. Do you see that?
Yeah, there it is.
Is that echo cancellation on or off?
It's illuminated.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Steve, are you hearing that on your side at all? Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, we'll keep going. Sorry for interrupting the flow there, Sean.
No, 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 no problem.
Yeah, amazing career. I want to go back to your time in the Marines. You're working on FA-18s, I think, if that is that
Yep,
right?
it
What did
means.
you learn there? I love that comment about learning logic. And one of the observations I have, some of the best indirect procurement leaders really bring a very logical, structured, and very process-driven approach to indirect procurement. How has that served you well into these roles? Everything from a warehouse manager to strategic sourcer.
Absolutely right. I guess it structured my mind a little bit differently. Prior to that, I was, haphazard everywhere. But because it was electronics and there's SOPs for absolutely everything when you're dealing with, jets. There's also a certain amount of innate knowledge that you have to be able to troubleshoot a problem. You have to understand if this, then that, and you have to be able to kind of see everything in your head, but be able to go down multiple branches at once till you get to a point where you can look in a book and it says, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's probably what it is." So you need to chase things down. And all of that really applies to everything that you do in industry, manufacturing, whatever. There are a million components to everything you do. There's always data that's out there. There's people that are out there. Every person has a different view on everything. So no person that you talk to is ever the same as another person that you talk to. You have to understand where they came from so you can understand where they're going through and how they see things. So in my early years, as I was coming up, I took a look inside a lot of the people to understand where they were coming from. And I don't know that it's something that I could teach somebody, but it's just an innate way that my mind works, even to this day. And my wife really loves the way my mind works sometimes. And it's just interesting. She'll ask, "Why do you do that?" I said, "Because it's logical." And it's not something that I do consciously anymore. It's just in my mind, that's the way it works and that's the way it follows. Sometimes, you have to reroute, but by and large, I couldn't tell you I couldn't tell you necessarily how to do something. It's just how my mind works now.
Yeah. Indirect procurement, what does it mean? You made a comment earlier that it was everything that didn't neatly fall on someone else's plate. How would you define indirect?
When people ask me what I do, I often tell them that I'm more of a magician. I'm the guy behind the scenes making things happen so that everything can go on as it's supposed to go on. And I was talking to some people about it a little bit earlier, and the biggest difference is in indirect purchasing. If you don't hear anything, that means you did your job right. If you hear something, that means something's wrong. Whereas on the direct side, it's a lot different. Um, if you don't hear anything, something's wrong. If you do hear something, it's right.
And what is indirect? How do you define it? And how would you contrast it just definitionally from direct?
All the goods and services that go into a product but do not appear on a bill of materials would probably be the most succinct way that I could put it.
That's pretty good. It's pretty good, Sean. I like that. I was talking to someone about a week ago who is in procurement, but they're in direct goods.
Hmm.
And the comment they made to me was indirect is not nearly as glamorous as direct.
Ah,
Direct is where all the action is.
I would actually say it's the exact opposite. And I was talking to one of my associates the other day about there were several direct jobs that came up, and they were wanting to go through and take a look. Maybe they wanted to move over to direct. To me, direct is boring. It's everything is specified. Everything is already spelled out. You know what the price is. You've got a drawing. You've got pretty much everything that you need. Whereas on the indirect side, there's a lot of intangibles that you need to take into account. And there's a lot of pathways that you can take to get there. I think what separates it for me, there's no way that I could sit at a desk day after day looking at drawings and looking at specifications and doing basically what I would consider monotonous work day after day after day, doing the same thing day after day. In indirect, I've been doing it for 20 plus years and I've never had a day that's the same as the day before. Every project that you do, every service that you quote is different to some degree because I've got right now I'm working across just the US. I've got 35 different sites and the SOW for every site is different. That's what I
It's
love
amazing.
about indirect.
You've got this diversity. What leads to the diversity of challenges across those 35 sites? What are the dimensions of that?
Um, First, you've got the difference between manufacturing and distribution. Distribution a little bit simpler in this particular instance, um, just because of the way that they work and the equipment that they have. Whereas in manufacturing, a lot more complex, a lot more services that you need. This is a service quote that I was working on. Just a lot more services that go into manufacturing than they do into distribution, at least in my instance.
One of the I'm gonna ask some questions. I think a lot of the folks that interact with what we do are more on that warehouse and distribution side. You talked about working in a warehouse, and then you bought for that warehouse. You've seen both sides of that equation, seen both sides, being both the end customer that was running it and the person that was supporting it through procurement. What did you observe? What did you take away that if you were just buying for those warehouse locations, you wouldn't know?
There's a million things that you see when you walk into a warehouse or a manufacturing site that don't get conveyed in an email or a Teams meeting. I'm a visual person, I'm a visual learner. I can walk into a facility, I can walk by any area, and I can mentally account things that may be sitting there that might not necessarily be important right now, but in 2 months from now, when they ask me another question, in my head, I just have the ability to look back and go, oh yeah, that was in the corner. If we take this and this and this, we take all these pieces that I saw as I walked through and put them together, we can put together a better deal. We'll be able to leverage it better or whatnot. And it's the same thing with manufacturing. Unless you're someone who can walk through a facility, take a look at everything that's around you and understand what it is, how it works, and how it interacts with other pieces, it just gives you a better feel for what the possibilities are and how you can better leverage not just that facility, but because I've seen it in manufacturing, I've seen it in distribution, I have the ability to put the two together. Whereas, a lot of people who just have one facility, they see their facility day in and day out. They know what's good for their facility, but because I have the breadth to go across, 35 different sites, I can see it all and I can put it all together a little bit differently than somebody who doesn't go to all the facilities or doesn't understand all the facilities. I can sit in an ivory tower somewhere and I can prescribe this is what you should do. But similar to what's going on in the government right now, if you don't understand what's going on, odds are you're going to make a choice that's going to either damage the process, slow the process down, or derail the process completely.
Hmm. So your experience there, knowing what's going on the ground and the importance of getting out behind your desk is a theme. It's amazing. The procurement leaders that I know have been doing this the longest and are the most effective make this really stark contrast between the ivory tower and being on the ground. And I've got to imagine there's a balance there, right? And so I'm curious if you're sitting in front of someone that's earlier in their career and you're mentoring them right now, and they were saying like, Sean, give me some really practical, tactical, like what do I need to do when I'm at the home office or corporate to get ready for my site visit? What should I do at my site visit? And then how do I take that back to my desk and do something with it?
One of the biggest things is understanding who your true stakeholders are. Stakeholders aren't necessarily the plant manager or the EHS manager all the time. They're important, but they're not the entire picture. The biggest thing that I would tell people is you need to know people from, the shop floor to the top floor. So if I'm going to go to a plant, first I'm going to understand, if I'm going into the headquarters or I work out of headquarters, I'm going to talk to the people that interact with that plant, or I'm going to talk to whoever the vice president of manufacturing is to understand what should I be looking at when I go in there from your perspective. And I would want to do that with as many levels in an office building as I could. But when I head out, I want to make sure that I've already set up meetings with, I want to talk to the leaders in that particular plant, but I also want them to introduce me to the people that are out on the floor, who's running the person running the tool crib, the person that's responsible for uniforms or rugs, or who's your maintenance supervisor, who manages your fork truck fleet. Those are all the people that I want to talk to. And even as I'm talking to those people, they're referring me to other people. So by the time you're done, you have a pretty intricate web of contacts at any particular facility, and you can reach out to pretty much anyone. And if you're the kind of person that's going into a facility and you're trying to understand what these people are doing, how they're doing it, why they do it the way they do, and how each piece interacts with the other piece, when you're sitting wherever you're sitting and putting a plan together, you understand the implications of every decision you make, or the vast majority of the decisions that you make. And the line that you have, there's going to be some times where you know that a certain facility isn't necessarily going to go along with this because it's not 100% in their best interest. However, when you look at the good overall, you have to make a case to that particular facility or that particular person, understand the what's in it for me portion of the question for them, answer that question for them, so that you can go, look, I know this is a hard pill to swallow. This is why we're doing it. This is the direction we're heading. This is what you need to understand. And this is why I'm saying we need to go this way.
Such a great point. Give an example of that from your experience, where it really walks through from some initiative maybe not being entirely in the best interest of that warehouse or that physical location, and then really selling it to them in a way that's authentic.
Um, Probably one of the hardest discussions that you're going to have is around people who use material handling equipment. Um, and there the two sides of it. There's the equipment itself, and then there's the maintenance that's behind it. I'm in charge of the fleet for Fortune brands, and I manage pretty much the fleet in U.S., Canada, and Mexico. As we come together as one company, there are a lot of sites out there that used to take care of their own P&Ls. They used to take care of their own equipment. They may have some older equipment. They may have purchased equipment. They may have leased equipment, whatever you want to call it. So one of the things that we're doing right now, a lot of them will have basically a mishmash of equipment. And one of the things that we're rolling across is, look, we need to standardize the equipment. We need to move from LP to electric. We need to get away from changing batteries. We need to standardize the trucks. We need to move from sit down to stand up, for ergonomic reasons or and productivity reasons. So as you go through and you start to do some of this stuff, you bring this information back to them and you give them real world examples. And as you begin to cross facility to facility and you do one facility or two facilities at a time, these people talk to each other. And as long as you're upfront with them, look, I know you've got this kind of equipment and you've dealt with this guy for 20 years, but I can bring you in brand new equipment at a lower price than what you're doing now. I can bring this guy in to maintain it. It may cost a little bit more upfront, but over time, if you look at the total cost of operation, your total cost of your operation is going to go down with A, with new equipment, B, if it's properly maintained. So if you come at people with honesty and with uh, your ethics intact, and you tell them what you're going to do, you tell them why you're going to do it, and you tell them what the benefits are, most people that I've ever dealt with in any situation are going to be a little bit hesitant up front. They're going to be a little bit hesitant even partway through a transition. But if you've done everything you're supposed to do and you've told the truth all the way along, I haven't run into an issue yet where it hasn't worked out.
Hmm, that's powerful. It's that authenticity, that using data, that not trying to be salesy, but at the same time being persuasive. It's very, very powerful. Sean, thanks. Um, all right, you're an indirect procurement leader. You're walking into a brand new company. You've got 30 distribution centers or 30 warehouses that you're managing. What are the top couple problems that you're inevitably going to face at the outset of that job?
Assuming that, everybody's been taking care of themselves, it's going to be establishing your relationship and establishing um, your strategy, because your strategy may not be the strategy that they were thinking. If I'm walking into a chain of distribution centers, normally if they've been operating independently for so long, I'll run into the same situation. I've got a mishmash of equipment. I haven't looked at my maintenance costs. I'm doing maintenance internally, which typically you can do it both ways, but you don't really understand your cost, your true cost, if you're doing something internally, because all of those costs are hidden. So the biggest things you're going to do, you're going to run into the resistance, and you've got to make friends. You've got to make inroads. Normally, you want to pick a couple of the low-hanging fruit. You want to get some quick wins. Whether that's through bringing in a GPO with MRO or something like that, or bringing in an agreement with a national provider for equipment and establishing standards across the board. Those are usually the biggest things that you're going to run into.
So if someone in that position, what are their biggest that's what they're going to have to do. What do you think their biggest pain points are? The things that are just like, man, if I can solve this problem, I will be successful at my job. What are those things that really reach the point of not just being pain, but acute pain that you've got to solve?
The biggest one is data.
Hmm.
That's that's been that's always going to be the pain point. Understanding what you have and what you need.
Hmm.
If I can understand that, I'm, a good third of the way down the road that I need to get down. Once you've got all that data and you can understand where everything sits, and you can start to put your strategy together about where you are, where you need to be, and put your plan together to bridge the gap.
That data is hard to get to. Where does it live? How do you get to it? What do you do with it?
So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. I mean, if you're talking individual spend data, there's a million spend cubes out there that you can use, but even those are going to take a little bit of time. That's the other piece of information I would throw out there. Putting a good program together takes a little bit of time. You can do it right, or you can do it twice, and that's what I've noticed a lot of times. So usually when I put a plan together, it may take a little bit longer than you want it to take, but when that plan comes together, it's going to be the right plan and it's going to be executable to the high degree. Um, and when you've got a good plan, everything comes together. And sometimes it doesn't come together, but those are few and far between. You take a step back, you reassess, find out where you went wrong, and you keep going.
Yeah, I love
Sometimes
that. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
sometimes data resides in an invoice. And there's an ugly side of what we do as well. Sometimes you have to get into the invoice level to understand, stretch wrap would probably be a good one. What kind of stretch wrap am I buying? 20 inch, 30 inch? What gauge is it? Is it linear? Is it blown? So you start to get into some of that stuff. Whereas, most people on indirect, they don't necessarily have a specification. They don't have a part number. So you have to get down and dirty. And if you can find people that know this stuff and you can create that relationship with them, makes things a little bit easier. But there's a lot of times where you've got to get your hands dirty and you've got to get in the system and you have to pull the invoices and put it together in a manner that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's maybe talk a little bit about the procurements. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about procurement's interaction with finance. So the CFO, the controller, there's this interesting connection between the work that we do as procurement leaders and accounts payable and some other finance functions. What are some examples of your interactions there and some best practices?
I've been pretty fortunate. The finance people that I've worked with for the past several years, almost the last 20 years, have been excellent. They understand, and they understand what I'm trying to do, and they try to put guidelines in place that help you. Um, even now, it's a journey. There's a destination out there, but you're never going to get to your destination because it's always going to be a little bit farther off because there's always a little bit more improvement that you can do. So the way that we normally work now, if I've got a project that I'm working on, I'll pull the data, and normally finance is included in that. We'll pull the data, we'll review the data with finance, we'll go over it and say, hey, this is what we think. Based on our strategy, we think we've got this much spend, we think we can save you this much, and we think it'll take this long to implement. And they're pretty good about it. They'll say, okay, let's write this up, let's talk to some people about it. And normally they will go with me when I'm gonna, I've already talked to my boss about it, they've talked to their boss about it. So now it's finance and I going to, whether it's the VP of manufacturing and the VP of distribution, to say, hey, we've got this idea that we want to implement. We went through it, we think it's valid. Let's do it. And usually you get the buy-in because it's by the time you get to that point, both you've looked at it and finance has looked at it, a couple other people have looked at it. You've refined it to a pretty finite degree. And the biggest thing that finance does for us after that is how are you going to track that? Because tracking is always going to be key because there's no part numbers where you can go back and say, I bought 27 of this part number at, my delta was this, so I saved this much. On a service, you can't necessarily do that. So you have to go back. Well, I reduced, 14 pieces of equipment, and here's the cost on that piece of equipment for, 12 months or whatever your guideline is. So they're pretty good about helping you figure out how it needs to be measured and then putting something in place so that if someone questions where that money came from, you can actually go back, point to a physical place in a G&L and say, it came from there. You can't necessarily see it, but you'll see at the end of the year or at the end of the month, you'll see that there's a variance in your budget to the positive. Those can be offset. Those can sometimes be offset by production variance. So it's kind of a fine art. But as long as you're working with finance and you get their buy-in and you get the higher up buy-in, I've never run into a situation where they said, no, that's false. Cost
That's
avoidance, on
powerful.
the other hand,
Yeah.
cost avoidance is a little bit different. That one's a little bit harder battle to fight.
Yeah. Um, what is the what is the procurement reports up into a lot of different functions, but if you had to sort of pinpoint, there's a lot of discussion right now about the strategic role of procurement. That procurement is more than just cost savings, and of course that's true. What is the way? What is the way to demonstrate that strategic value, like really concretely? Like if you're sitting across the table from your boss at your annual performance review and you want to demonstrate something other than cost savings that really quantifies or demonstrates your value, what's that go-to thing? What's that sure bet thing?
It's a pretty good question. I think for me, the strategy itself, it doesn't always revolve around the part. It revolves around the partnerships that you build. And that's normally what I come back to. Anybody can jump in and they can get a nickel here, a dime there, whatnot. But from my perspective only, if you're building a partnership with your supplier and they understand what you do, you understand what their limitations are, I think it creates a different kind of situation and it helps your strategy. So if I'm working with a supplier that, whether they're new or whether I've been working with them for 10 years, I think as time goes on and you build that relationship, you build the trust, particularly if it's the same people on both sides for an extended period of time. I think that's one of the things that you bring to the table is being able to create a long-term strategic partnership with a supplier versus a tactical supplier, one off, going out and buying gloves or whatever. If I'm buying my big stuff, I want to buy it from a long-term partner.
It's powerful. I'll something a little zeitgeisty right now. A lot of talk about tariffs. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there. What's your take?
My take is Mr. Trump wrote several books on the art of the deal. I think he's a master negotiator. I think he throws a lot of things out there. There's a reason he's doing this, and I think he's got a pretty good game plan on what he's doing. Um, how it's going to end up, I think there's going to be some short-term pain, but I think there's going to be some long-term gain. And whether that's through a strategic partnership or if it's just with someone who sees things the same way remains to be seen. I think
As
there's
supply
a
chain
lot of
leaders,
short-term.
sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, as supply chain leaders, as strategic sourcing leaders, what do we do to prepare for that?
The biggest thing you can do is understand where that pain is going to come from, what the tariff is on, what the tariff is not on. Unfortunately, in my field, steel is one of the things that there's going to be a tariff on, and a lot of the deals that I deal, or a lot of the things I deal with have steel. Fork trucks have steel, and I need a bunch of them. Um, Next, you have to put steps in place to mitigate that. Whether I can buy a different kind of fork truck or I can buy a different kind of glove that I can get same fit, form, function, quality. If I can get it locally, and now that I've got a 25% tariff I need to deal with, I need to resource that. So you back up, you take a look at different areas of supply. You know, does if is my tariff out of Mexico lower than my tariff out of China or Canada? Where do I need to source that so that I can make sure that we're getting the lowest total cost of ownership? I
Powerful.
do it yeah, I do it on a small basis. The
Yeah.
people on the direct side, they're having a lot of fun right now.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's got to be a lot of sleepless nights. Um, you're sitting in front of someone earlier in their career, a couple years out of college. They've chosen supply chain, strategic sourcing, procurement for their career. Good on them. What's the advice you give them that you think is durable advice that's going to serve them well for the next 20 years?
People are the key. Un Have relationships with people, whether it's the people on the floor or the people you work with. Um, Understand what they go through. Understand how they deal with things so that you, as a person, you have an understanding of how they're going to react when you do something. Um, Making relationships count. Come at people with authenticity, with your ethics intact. Do what you're gonna do what you say, and then say what you're gonna do, and then tell them you did what you said you were gonna do. I think that's the key. Keeping your just keeping your ethics about you. Be
Yeah.
original. Be authentic.
Well, thank you, Sean. I really appreciate your time and your insights, and just congratulations on your career thus far. It's amazing from working on F-18s to some of the most prestigious manufacturing companies in the world to creating some of the world's best consumer products. It's amazing, and I think what stood out to me really too is just the humanity and leadership that you bring to those situations. So I really appreciate your time.
Not a problem, Daniel. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate what you're
Yeah,
doing. It's worthy.
thanks. Thanks. That was Sean. That was phenomenal. We've done probably 6 or 7 of these now, and that was by far